In the 1960s, one engine was so monstrously powerful that NASCAR had to change the rules. And not just once. It was feared, admired, and they tried to stop it. And twice, they succeeded. In this video, Wheelines dive into the history of the 426 Hemi. Wheelines learn how Chrysler created this beast, why its debut at Daytona caused shock and sparked a war over the rulebook, how it returned to spawn the legendary winged cars, and why, despite its power, its era of dominance came to an abrupt end. Get ready for the story of the most formidable and uncompromising racing engine ever to hit American tracks. The story of this beast begins not on the asphalt of the racetrack, but deep inside Chrysler's engineering labs, where the idea of a perfect combustion chamber had been nurtured for decades. Long before the term Hemi became synonymous with raw power, the corporation's engineers were experimenting with hemispherical chambers. It was in their DNA, their philosophy, which held that this dome-like shape allowed for the most efficient combustion of the fuel mixture, enabling larger valves and freer airflow. By the 1950s, their firepower V8 engines with these chambers were already dominating on both roads and racetracks, paving the way for the legend to come. But by the early 1960s, the competition in NASCAR was heating up. Ford and Chevrolet were fielding increasingly powerful and advanced engines, and Chrysler knew that to not just compete, but to utterly dominate, they needed something completely new. Not an evolution, but a revolution. And so, in mid-1963, a strategic decision was made in the halls of the engineering department that would forever change the landscape of American motorsports. The order was given: create a new engine, unprecedented in its power and reliability, capable of crushing any opponent. This wasn't just a project, it was a mission, the development of the 426 Race Hemi. The name said it all: race and nothing else. This engine was not meant for public roads, for production cars. It was born for the track, for maximum RPMs, for victory at any cost. Chrysler's engineers, inspired by this ambitious goal, threw themselves into the work with incredible energy. There were long days and sleepless nights spent over drafting tables, with the lights in the design offices burning until dawn. The tables were buried under calculations, prototypes of cylinders, crankshafts, and pistons. Every millimeter, every component was the subject of heated debates, countless iterations, and redesigns. The challenges were immense. It wasn't just about increasing the displacement to 426 cubic inches. That's about 7 liters, but also ensuring incredible strength for the colossal stresses its components would face on the track. How could they achieve maximum compression without sacrificing reliability? How could they ensure optimal airflow through the massive valves in those hemispherical chambers? How could they tame the vibrations and heat that could tear a lesser engine apart? These questions hung in the air, mixing with the smell of machine oil and drafting paper, but ambition outweighed any difficulty. Engineers like Tom Hoover, Bill Wirtman, Dave Koffel, and others were obsessed with creating the perfect racing machine. They knew they were working on something truly revolutionary. The anticipation grew with each successful test. When the first prototypes of the 426 Race Hemi finally hit the dynamometer, the air filled with a deafening, raw, unfiltered roar. This was not just the sound of a running engine, it was the thunder of a coming storm. The gauges went off the charts, the power exceeded all imaginable limits, and the smell of high-octane fuel mixed with exhaust smoke, creating the intoxicating scent of pure, untamed power. This was the herald of an era when Chrysler cars, with this monster under the hood, were destined not just to win, but to pulverize their rivals. The king of the track was born, and the world of motorsports braced for the inevitable shock. And the shock came swiftly. Less than a year later, in February 1964, The Daytona International Speedway in Florida was electric with anticipation for the season's main event, the Daytona 500. The fastest cars and the most fearless drivers in America lined up at the start. But amidst the familiar sounds and smells, a new, unsettling note hung in the air. It came from the Chrysler cars, which looked and sounded different this time. Under their hoods was not just a new engine, but an entirely new breed of beast, the 426 race Hemi. Development of the Hemi had begun in 1963, and while Chrysler's engineers knew they were creating something special, even they might not have fully grasped the scale of the revolution they were about to unleash. This wasn't just an engine, it was an engineering statement, built for one single purpose: to dominate NASCAR. And now, at Daytona, the moment of truth had arrived. Car number 43, a Plymouth Belvedere driven by a young Richard Petty, a name that was already beginning to make waves in motorsports, was one of those carrying this secret weapon? Spectators and competitors, accustomed to powerful but predictable battles, initially paid little mind to the new Chrysler entries. But when the green flag dropped, everything changed. The roar of the Hemi was unlike anything heard on the track before. It was a deep, guttural sound that drowned out the other engines, like thunder silencing a whisper. Richard Petty's Plymouth Belvedere didn't just drive, it flew. From the start, it shot into the lead with breathtaking speed. It seemed to be operating on a different level of reality. With every lap, he pulled further and further away from the pack. His rivals desperately tried to keep up, but their engines seemed to run out of breath, unable to even catch a draft from the King and his mighty Plymouth. By the midpoint of the race, it was clear this wasn't a competition, it was a demonstration of force. Richard Petty, with cool mastery, commanded his beast, turning the 500-mile race into his own personal showcase. He crossed the finish line first, a full lap ahead of the next car. This wasn't just a win, it was a knockout. The atmosphere at the track after the finish was a mix of shock, admiration, and a profound realization. Competitors stood in their garages, shaking their heads. They had just witnessed the birth of a new absolute monarch. The speed displayed by the Hemi-powered Chrysler cars was unprecedented. It was as if someone had rewritten the rules of the game in the middle of the match. The 426 race Hemi didn't just win a race, it immediately declared itself the undisputed king of the ovals, launching an era of total dominance that would define the face of NASCAR for years to come. The world of motorsports understood big changes were coming. And their name was Hemi. The roar of the Hemi wasn't just a sound. It was an earthquake, shaking the very foundations of NASCAR. Its dominance, ignited in a blinding flash at Daytona, became an undeniable blitzkrieg throughout the entire 1964 season. Richard Petty, David Pearson, Bobby Isaac, and their Chrysler-backed teammates, armed with the formidable 426 race Hemi, weren't merely winning races. They were utterly overwhelming the competition. Ford and General Motors teams, despite their best efforts, were consistently left trailing in a cloud of dust and frustration, watching the distinctive Hemi-powered Plymouths and Dodges disappear into the distance. NASCAR's leadership, always keen to maintain close, thrilling competition, watched this unrivaled supremacy with growing alarm. This level of one-sided dominance wasn't healthy for the sport. It threatened to alienate fans and stifle rival manufacturers, turning races into predictable processions. Something had to give. By late 1964, the urgent whispers among officials and rival teams solidified into an official decree. NASCAR, responding directly to what they perceived as an overwhelming, almost unfair technological advantage, formally declared the 426 Hemi a special racing engine. This wasn't a badge of honor in their eyes. It was a classification that implicitly distanced it from the traditional concept of a stock car engine. To reassert the spirit of stock car racing and level the playing field, they unveiled a bombshell for the upcoming 1965 season, a new, incredibly stringent homologation rule. This rule demanded that any engine used in NASCAR competition must have at least 500 copies installed in street-legal production vehicles readily available for public sale through dealerships. The underlying philosophy was clear. If an engine was so revolutionary on the track, it needed to prove its stock credentials by being accessible to the everyday American motorist. For Chrysler, this pronouncement felt less like a rule change and more like a direct, punitive strike at their innovation and success. The 426 race Hemi, conceived in 1963 as a purebred, no-compromise competition engine, was a marvel of engineering, but it was absolutely not designed for Main Street. It was inherently loud, notoriously thirsty, extremely expensive to produce, and entirely unsuited for meeting road vehicle regulations concerning emissions, noise, or even basic drivability. The notion of transforming this track-devouring beast into a compliant, reliable, and marketable street engine, then retooling factories, establishing supply chains, securing necessary certifications, and finally mass-producing and distributing 500 units into dealerships, all within a mere few months before the 1965 racing season was set to begin, was not just daunting, it was quite simply an impossible feat. Cornered and believing the new rule was arbitrary, discriminatory, and a betrayal of the spirit of competition, Chrysler's leadership did not bend. They broke. Their response was not submission, but an act of unprecedented defiance. In a move that sent shockwaves reverberating through the entire motorsports world, Chrysler announced its complete and immediate withdrawal. All factory support, every single one of their dominant Plymouths and Dodges, and all their star drivers, including the reigning champion Richard Petty, would be conspicuously absent from NASCAR for the entire 1965 season. The impact was immediate and profound. Daytona 1965 opened to an eerie, unnatural silence where the Hemi's thunderous roar should have been. The grandstands, though still packed with fervent fans, buzzed with incredulous talk of the Hemi ban and Chrysler's daring, dramatic protest. Empty pit stalls where Petty's iconic Blue No. 43 Plymouth should have sat served as stark reminders of the missing Titans. It was a colossal act of rebellion against the very organization that governed the sport they had so overwhelmingly dominated, a silent protest louder than any engine. This wasn't just a technical squabble over engine displacement or cylinder heads. It was a full-blown declaration of war between a defiant manufacturer and a powerful sanctioning body, a dramatic standoff that would forever be etched as one of the most controversial and pivotal moments in the tumultuous history of American stock car racing. The question lingered in the exhaust-scented air. How long could NASCAR truly thrive without its reigning king, and how long could Chrysler afford to stay off the track, sidelined by a rule they considered utterly unjust? The answer to that question didn't take long. Sitting on the sidelines, watching competitors divide the spoils was not in Chrysler's character. Engineers were already hard at work on a solution that would allow the Hemi to roar on the racetracks once more, but this time on their own terms, bypassing what they saw as unfair homologation rules. And so, in 1966, the world saw it the Fortwo 6th Street Hemi. It was a brilliant, though forced, adaptation of the same wild, uncompromising racing monster that had shaken Daytona 2 years prior. For public roads, it was, of course, slightly tamed. Chrysler's engineers made several compromises. They lowered the compression ratio to run on regular pump gas, changed the camshaft profile for smoother and more predictable daily driving, and replaced the racing carburetors with more practical and efficient units for road use. But even in this civilian version, the 426 Hemi remained a true beast. The officially stated 425 horsepower was a notoriously underrated figure. On the dyno, these engines often produced much more, striking fear into competitors and becoming an object of desire for every car enthusiast. The most important part wasn't the impressive numbers, but the strategic maneuver. The mass production of the 426th Street Hemi, installed in thousands of production cars like the Plymouth Belvedere, Dodge Coronet, Charger, and GTX, finally allowed the company to meet NASCAR's infamous homologation rule. The requirement to produce at least 500 units for public sale was now satisfied. The road back to the racetrack was open, and the automotive world held its breath. Drivers, fans, and even the competitors who had breathed a sigh of relief after Chrysler's exit now anxiously awaited the return of the king, and it wasn't just a return, it was a triumph. From 1966, when the thunderous, unmistakable roar of the Street Hemi once again filled the speedways, until 1969. The engine didn't just come back to NASCAR, it continued to dictate the terms, as if it had never left its throne. Richard Petty, David Pearson, Bobby Allison, Buddy Baker, the great names of the era, driving Plymouths and Dodges with the heart of a 426 Hemi under the hood, once again became synonymous with victory. These years were a golden age for Chrysler. Countless wins in individual races, championship titles of the seasons where Hemi-powered cars dominated were particularly striking, leaving rivals with nothing but dust and disappointment. The Hemi's power was undeniable, its reliability legendary, and its ability to reach mind-bending speeds on the long straights, then tirelessly run lap after lap, was simply incredible. It was unbeatable, unyielding, and its superiority became so obvious that any attempt to stop it seemed futile. It was during this period, when its power and sheer size became not just impressive but truly legendary, that the 426 Hemi earned the nickname that lives on in the hearts of muscle car fans to this day, the Elephant Engine, and for good reason. Picture it, a massive cast iron block weighing nearly 800 pounds on its own, with huge hemispherical cylinder heads that, due to their shape and size, resembled the tusks of a mythical beast more than typical engine parts. Its dimensions were so imposing that fitting the Hemi into the standard engine bays of most cars required special chassis modifications, reinforced mounts, and sometimes even a complete redesign of the underhood layout. But even more impressive than its physical size was its power, colossal, unstoppable, capable of making the very track tremble with its roar, and launching cars with unimaginable fury, leaving behind only a thick plume of burnt rubber. It was a true giant, able to withstand incredible stress, operate at extreme RPMs, and deliver staggering power that brought victory after victory, cementing its status not just as an engine, but as a symbol of absolute power on the track. The Elephant had returned to its natural habitat, and its roar silence stalled out. It didn't just compete in races. It continued to rewrite NASCAR history, setting new standards for speed and dominance, becoming the dream of every muscle car fan and the embodiment of American horsepower. But, as is often the case with kings whose power seems limitless, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. And these clouds were not of weather, but of new, even stricter rules, destined to one day challenge even the Elephant itself, threatening its absolute reign, and forcing Chrysler's engineers to seek new, radical solutions to stay on top. In search of those radical solutions, Chrysler's engineers looked to the sky, or more specifically, to the laws of aerodynamics, to find a way to squeeze even more speed out of the already legendary 426 Hemi. If conventional body shapes were reaching their limits, it was time to change the shapes themselves. Thus was born the most daring and recognizable era in the history of muscle cars and NASCAR, the era of the winged cars. In 1969, with the 426 Hemi already established as the Elephant and reigning supreme on the tracks, Dodge unveiled something truly unprecedented, the Charger Daytona. This was not just a car, it was a manifesto of speed, a machine that looked like it had driven straight out of the future. With its intimidating, sky-high rear wing and its sharp, extended nose cone, the Charger Daytona looked like it was designed to punch a hole through the air. And it did, developed specifically for the super speedways where speed was everything. This winged warrior, powered by the monstrous 426 Hemi, immediately began setting new records. It didn't just go fast, it flew, giving the Hemi an aerodynamic advantage that competitors could only dream of. The Hemi's dominance on the ovals became even more absolute, and the Daytona itself became an instant icon of ultimate speed and engineering audacity. The success of the Daytona was so overwhelming that in 1970, Plymouth introduced its own version of the winged car, the no less impressive Superbird. Essentially, it was the same engineering genius in a different package, but with the same unyielding heart, the 426 Hemi engine. The Superbird, with its unique meep-meep horn mimicking the Roadrunner cartoon character, and the same incredible aerodynamics, continued the victory march of the Aero-Hemi combination. These cars were built for one purpose: to win in NASCAR, and they accomplished that mission with stunning efficiency. On the racetracks, as the roaring 426 Hemi propelled these monstrous creations to speeds approaching 200 miles per hour, the winged Hemi cars became like flying fighter jets, leaving everything that dared to challenge them far behind. Their sleek forms and giant wings were not just a design statement. They were the culmination of engineering thought, designed to maximize the boundless power of the elephant. The Dodge Charger Daytona and Plymouth Superbird didn't just win races. They changed the very idea of what a race car should look and perform like. They became icons of speed, recognizability, and an uncompromising competitive spirit. Their bold, almost alien appearance stirred a storm of emotions, from unbridled admiration among fans to bitter envy and furious protest from competitors who simply could not keep up with this winged power. These cars are true monuments to an era when Chrysler, armed with the 426 Hemi, was not afraid to undertake the most daring experiments for a single goal: total domination of America's racetracks. Total domination of America's racetracks. That was the goal for which Chrysler spared no expense and no bold engineering experiment. And when the 426 Hemi, armed with the audacious wings of the Dodge Charger Daytona and Plymouth Superbird, reached that pinnacle, literally leaving competitors in its dust, it seemed nothing could stop its triumphant flight. But history teaches us, any absolute power provokes a powerful reaction. And for the elephant named Hemi, its sunset arrived as swiftly and relentlessly as its dazzling sunrise. By the end of 1970, the roar of the Hemi engines deafening the competition, and the sight of these dominant aero cars blasting by at incredible speeds had become unbearable for NASCAR. The series leadership could no longer ignore such an overwhelming advantage and decided to take drastic measures. The new rules announced for the 1971 season were written with one clear goal: to tame the winged monsters and their giant engines. From now on, any specialized aero vehicle, a category that specifically targeted the infamous Dodge Charger Daytona and Plymouth Superbird equipped with an engine larger than 305 cubic inches, faced a draconian choice. They would either have to carry crippling weight penalties, turning them into heavyweights, or be forced to drastically, critically reduce their engine's displacement. It wasn't just a rule change, it was a death knell for the Hemi, for Chrysler and their legendary 426 Hemi. This was a direct shot to the heart. The 426 cubic inches of power that had been the source of their incredible advantage now became their Achilles heel. Imagine, every extra pound of weight imposed by the penalties ruthlessly killed the very aerodynamic advantages for which the Daytona and Superbird were created, turning them from sleek projectiles into cumbersome, weighted-down giants. And trying to shrink a Titan like the Hemi down to 305 cubic inches was not just technically difficult, but completely economically unfeasible. It would have meant re-engineering the engine, losing the very untamed power it was created to deliver. Essentially, these rules were written not so much to level the playing field, but to forcibly stop the 426 Hemi specifically, which had become too successful and too dominant. And the 1971 season revealed the brutality of this new reality. Races that had recently been a triumphal parade for the factory Dodge and Plymouth teams turned into a grueling and hopeless struggle. The Hemi-powered cars, burdened by impossible weight penalties, couldn't keep up with their lighter, less restricted competitors. Even the greatest drivers couldn't compensate for the artificially created deficit in power and mass. The era when the elephant reigned supreme on NASCAR tracks came to an abrupt and bitter end. Its dominance was concluded not on the track in the heat of battle, but at the rulemaker's table, where it was decided that its success had become too inconvenient for everyone else. Thus, in just 7 short years, from its triumphant debut in 1964, winning the Daytona 500, to its forced retreat in 1971, the 426 Hemi journeyed from a groundbreaking idea to an absolute champion and then to a victim of its own stunning success. Its power was so undeniable, its advantage so clear, that it took targeted, unprecedented rule changes to restore any semblance of balance to the sport. The 426 Hemi was effectively pushed out of stock car racing's top tier, but its legend only grew, transforming it into a cultural icon of American automotive might, unbridled power, and the kind of engineering genius that was literally too good for its time. Its NASCAR era was over, but the story of the Hemi was just beginning. Even as its era in NASCAR came to an end, the story of the Hemi was just beginning. And, in fact, its departure from racing's top division only solidified its legendary status. The rules introduced by NASCAR at the end of 1970, which essentially wrote large engines like the 426 Hemi out of the big leagues by requiring either severe weight penalties for aero cars or a sharp reduction in displacement, didn't kill the Hemi. Instead, they turned it into a martyrous symbol of untamable power that they had to ban because it was simply too good. From that moment on, the 426 Hemi finally shed the shackles of racing regulations and fully unleashed its potential in another, no less demanding world, the drag strips and streets of America. If it was the king of speed on the ovals, it became the absolute god of power on the quarter mile. Its robust, over-engineered construction, originally designed to withstand the brutal demands of endurance racing, was perfectly suited for extreme modifications and the insane torque figures required for lightning-fast launches. The Elephant engine, which earned its nickname not just for its size, but for its colossal, earth-shaking power, could now roar at full throat, unrestrained by any rules. Except the courage of its owner, the 426 Hemi became the gold standard of muscle car performance. Owning one wasn't just prestigious, it was a statement. It came not only with hundreds of horsepower, but with an aura of invincibility inherited from its racing victories. Every car with a Hemi badge under the hood, be it a Plymouth Barracuda, Dodge Charger, Challenger, or Road Runner, instantly became an iconic classic, the embodiment of the American dream of speed and freedom. And while Chrysler was forced to release the detuned Street Hemi in 1966 to meet NASCAR's homologation rules, it was this version of the engine that became the cornerstone for generations of hot rodders. This supposedly tamed street engine was, in reality, an incredibly stout foundation that enthusiasts could easily build to power levels far exceeding the original race specs. Today, the 426 Hemi is not just an engine. It's a living legend that continues to beat in the hearts of car lovers worldwide. You'll find it not only in meticulously restored, show-quality muscle cars that shine at car shows. Its roar can still be heard on drag strips, where it continues to prove its dominance in historic racing classes. It lives on in the garages of enthusiasts who dedicate years of their lives to restoring and modifying these engines, striving to squeeze out every last drop of power Chrysler's engineers built into them. Every Hemi-powered car today is more than just a vehicle. It's a moving monument to engineering genius, a symbol of an era when power and uncompromising performance came first. From Richard Petty's victory at the 1960 for Daytona 500 to its exile from NASCAR in 1971 and up to the present day, the 426 Hemi has journeyed from track dominator to immortal myth. It remains one of the greatest automotive power plants of all time. An engine that was so good it had to be banned, but which, against all odds, continues to live on, inspiring and astonishing generations of car fans. Its story is not just one of metal and oil. It's a story of passion, engineering triumph, and the relentless pursuit of pure, unadulterated power. And that roar will never fade. Ultimately, the story of the 426 Hemi is not just a saga of metal and speed, but a deep reflection on the untamable nature of engineering genius. It shows how pure, uncompromising power, upon reaching its peak, inevitably clashes with the attempts to regulate it, transforming from a tool of dominance into a symbol of freedom from rules. But isn't it in this eternal dance between limitless potential and human-made limits that true legends are born? And what is the true price of greatness that refuses to be tamed? What's the lesson you take from this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next deep dive into automotive legends, and hit the like button if the roar of the elephant echoed in your heart.